link in for us, Tom, into the chat, and I'll put in the comments.
Yes. All right, folks. Hello. If you're joining us, welcome. We are going to be starting in about 5 minutes' time. Hi, I'm Tom Barrett. I'm the host here. Look at my fancy new graphic, which I've been spruiking.
You've got to do the intro that you've been doing, Tom. That's not the intro that you were doing.
In a world. Look at the world that we're in as well there. We've got glowing things, cool things. So yeah, we're kicking off in about 4 minutes' time. If you are joined us already, please say hi in the chat, say where you are. And it would be great to kind of see you kind of joining our session. So get yourselves ready, practice writing something in the chat. If you've got any questions and things like that, be ready with those. But yeah, first job, add your name and where you are in the chat. We'll be starting really, really soon. It gives me a few minutes to play around with the layouts. This is a great tool called StreamYard, by the way.
It's really good.
Yeah.
The quality on the other end, like when you watched it, because sometimes the pixelating and the quality's top notch.
It's not too bad as well. It's not on a high definition setting either, this one, so even it could be even better.
Oh, so you
all right. It's going to be an interesting chat tonight, isn't it? As we explore a little bit about the humanness of teaching. I always find it a bit of a conundrum, that one. It's almost like when you kind of say, oh, it's student-centered learning, is like, well, whose learning is it if it's not student-centered? It's always such an important question, and yet also interesting one.
Yeah, I think the whole question around humanness is that the reality is we kind of constantly take humanness for granted because we are in our skin. Apparently, if anything, one of the benefits, we have to be some benefits out of COVID. It was so bad, but one of the benefits I think of COVID was it helped remind us of our humanness and actually how precious it is, and actually how much we actually really value it when we're denied it.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've got a few people trickling in. So folks, if you're with us, and please say hi. This is all pre-chat chat. So we're kicking off properly in like 1 minute. But all the good stuff is already happening. So say hi in the chat, please. Say where you're from, how your day's been. It's great for you to be making the time to join us, be part of the discussion and dialogue. So yeah, practice kind of getting on the chat there, and we'll be starting in just a moment's time. I changed my background color.
Very fancy. Oh, here we go.
Suit the slide.
Yeah.
Hey, Martin. Good to see you, mate. Priya. Oh, big hello from India. God, you've got some reach, Mr. Barrett. Just there we go.
Well, Alina's here from Oman as well. It's a big question, though, isn't it? That's the thing. It's like interesting kind of surprised and not surprised by people joining and about, this work is such an important question for all of us to be grappling with. So Sean's here from Melbourne, just up the road, no doubt. But, we've got people from all over the place who are grappling with the same questions. That's one thing I've certainly realized across this term running these sessions is just the togetherness and the kind of collective pull of this, that in the sense that we're all pulling in the same direction, and the need for that, need for more of that. Okay, so enough pre-chat. Let me get into things. So welcome everybody. My name is Tom Barrett and I'm the host of our AI for Education webinars. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Sophie Fenton and Steve Brophy, who will do some intros in a second. This is the fourth session that we've been running, and it's been great to be able to hold, I'll put my graphic back up again. It's been great to be able to hold some space for dialogue about this shifting space. And one of the things that people have been saying in response to this work and to these sessions is that it we try to have some slower conversations about stuff that's moving really, really quickly. Technology is typically a dynamic space, and it's important for us to be able to engage in some, important dialogue about this work. So let me start by acknowledging the country I'm from. I'm in at the minute, and where I'm coming from. So I'm on Bunurong land. The traditional custodians of the land of which I join you from today, and I recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and rising. This session is, we've already kind of name-checked some different places around the world, and it's great to kind of see you. If you haven't said where you're from, the lands you're from, please make sure you make a comment, add it in the chat, and connect with people in there as well. So it's great to see some other people in different parts of Australia, Brisbane, India, Yarraville, and also Oman as well. Let me see if I can spot any others. I think Michael, I spotted you. Welcome. Great to have you with us. So important to be able to come together to circle up and spend some time talking through some of these key considerations regarding AI for education. Let's just talk about some housekeeping. So we've got an hour together. Make sure you say hi in the chat if you haven't done so already. Use the chat for any questions as well. If anything that pops up, we're about to put them up on the screen. If you're curious to learn a little bit more about the expertise that Sophie and Steve share, make sure that you use the chat for some questions. This is the recording, and there'll be resources. So use the same YouTube link when you're looking for a replay or to share it with others. And we've got some new resources to share today. Ooh, very exciting. We'll be talking about that at the end, but also the slides from the session also go out on an email as well. So you don't have to worry about all of that. That'll be coming to you tomorrow. Also, no need to worry about your microphone or awkward breakout room at the end of the day because you're on a YouTube live stream. So the best you can do is just be a bit rambunctious in the chat. On the left here, this sort of diagram is a set of protocols, and these protocols are all to do with how do we engage in effective dialogue? How do we collaborate effectively with each other? And so these are like the rules of engagement for us, our protocols. These are things I talk about whenever I'm working with any team in schools, or otherwise. I try to kind of share these and frame these as expectations. And Steve and Sophie, these are for you as well, just to tune in and to think about these. What is the expectation for you in participating in a webinar like this? So hard on the content, soft on people. I want you to ask those hard questions, and we've got plenty of interesting curly questions to explore. But we're not going to do that at the expense of a relationship. That's one of my favorite ways of framing that. So I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to offer some critique, but I'm not going to do that if it damages or diminishes a relationship. We're going to be kind, specific, and helpful in our critique. So any feedback that you have in the comments or in emails afterwards, make sure that you're kind and helpful and you can do that by being really precise and specific about what worked, what didn't, all that sort of stuff. On the left-hand side, I want you to step up and step back. And so Sophie and Steve, you're here to share your expertise and contribute, share what you can. I know that you will. And we'll all do our best to balance the dialogue and notice when we need to step back and allow others to come in. And the last protocol there is the traditional Chinese character Ting for listening. And it speaks about listening in a few different ways. So it speaks about 10 eyes. So we listen with eye contact. It was a bit tricky if you're an avatar on a chat, but, for us, there's something to think about. How do we show that we're here and we're ready and we're listening? We listen with one heart, so we listen with purpose. So this is about AI for education and how AI serves education. We also wrap our ear around the king. And so that's the left-hand side of the diagram. And basically we're saying that all of you have to treat us like royalty if we're speaking. So we get some royal treatment. So this is Ting for listening. And so it just reminds us to be as present and as focused as we can. Sophie and Steve, does that sound okay as a set of expectations for us?
I love this graphic. Love it.
That's great. Steve, can you maybe share a quick intro?
Hello, everybody. My name's Steve Brophy, and I come to you from Wurundjeri country in Melbourne. And I am the Director of Digital Transformation at Ivanhoe Grammar School. So I teach transformative technology to Year 9 students, and that's where the work of Sophie has greatly influenced. And then I'm responsible for strategy across the school for teaching and learning with regards to digital.
Steve, you're really welcome. You're coming back for a second webinar. This is your second. You were in for the inaugural webinar, and here you are again. Great to have you back. And Sophie, lovely to have you. We've been chatting for a while, trying to line up an opportunity like this. So Sophie, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. We have, and I actually kind of had to stall because I've been finishing a PhD, madly typing, which kind of is what brings me into this conversation. And yes, incredible work that I've been doing with Steve over the last few years. And it is highly relevant to the conversation we're having today. But I think the zeitgeist, the general kind of conversation we're having in education right now, which is around the nature of these emerging technologies, the implications, the opportunities, and the challenges that sit around them, and how we as educators kind of grapple in this space. So I'm looking forward to sharing some ideas and also, taking lots of ideas away from this conversation today.
Brilliant. Sophie, you are welcome. And so, folks, we're going to kick off by doing a section, which we've been doing in each of the different webinars. So if you've been joining us, and by the way, you don't get a free webinar if you've been joining for like 3 in a row or 4 in a row, like you don't get a free one or anything because they're all free. So, but if one thing we have been doing in each of our sessions, and this is the thing, right? One of the main reasons we're doing this is to be able to build educators' literacies around this work. And so kind of each of us maybe to spend a bit of time together and to come away with just a bump in our skill level, our knowledge, just an increase, a boost. And so this is hopefully playing a small part. And one of the things that we do in each of our sessions is that we talk about building blocks. And so the building blocks is all about just what are the foundational things that we need to be thinking about. And actually, Steve, you were one of the first people to kick this off back in session 1. And I'm just going to run through a couple of things that are really foundational knowledge and understanding for all of us. And I've also challenged Sophie and Steve to share with us something that they would like to teach us, or something that is really important to know about when it comes to AI for education. So OpenAI, ChatGPT is often the kind of doorway in for many people. It's been obviously on our scene since November last year, so it's been quite a few months. And so Steve initially helped us just to define, and I always like to define things and just go back to what it actually is. And so the chat talks about its conversational tuning. So when you're interacting with the chatbot, it's obviously tuned to be working in a conversational style, and that's just helpful in terms of how you actually might use it, you know. So staying in a conversation with it tends to kind of work better than just sort of one-off demands. GPT, and obviously you've been no doubt hearing about these, is a reference to some of the underlying architecture. And so G stands for generative, and so it's a particular type of AI model that we're dealing with here. And so when we say generative here, it's able to create and generate content. So text in, it can generate text out. That's distinguished from a discriminative model, which is like making a choice or labeling, is it this or is it that? And so is it Steve or is it water bottle? You know, like a discriminative model does that, or a generative model can maybe describe the difference between Steve and a water bottle. I'm not sure why I went to that example. Oh, there we go.
Which one?
Which one? And so generative, when you hear that GPT, G stands for generative. Pre-trained is all about the kind of training that's gone on beforehand, and the model is already trained on a huge amount of corpus, a huge amount of free text, scraped the internet, the whole of the internet, as people say. I think that's actually one of the things we've got to get better at, is actually knowing what that means. And so I've been kind of exploring a few new resources recently, a few kind of places where we might be able to find a bit more detail. But pre-trained means that there's been algorithms, training models being applied to a lot of text. It's been broken down, it's been built back up, and it's been using a technology called a transformer, which was invented by researchers at Google back in, I think, 2015 or 16, I think. So it's been around a while. And so a lot of the GPT 3s and 4s, these are all kind of in this family. ChatGPT is also a part of this family. It's just tuned to work better in conversation. And so let's just move on a little bit. So when we think about, there's all these things flying around. So LLM is a large language model. And so ChatGPT is in itself a large language model. There are lots of them, and I'll come back to that in a bit. We've just talked about the GPT. NLP, so this talks about natural language processing. This is a thing now that we are able to do. We can speak naturally to these chatbots. It understands our intentions, and then it kind of spits back an aligned response or completion. And so it's relying on natural language processing, and it's doing a much better job than Siri has ever done, really. I think most people will agree. ML, machine learning, so this is sort of the algorithmic layer of all of this. It's relying upon machine learning in terms of training. And so that's stuff that you would have heard about. And you would have also heard about prompts. And so this is our input, our interface with these AI tools is often starting, especially the text to something, it starts with a prompt. So it starts with us writing something, prompting it to then go off and create and complete that prompt for us. And so these are some of those kind of key terms. And my key new learning for tonight, which I haven't done in other webinars, is just that there are lots of these large language models. So everybody thinks that ChatGPT is often synonymous with AI, and that's, I suppose, relevant in regards to the zeitgeist of how we're experiencing it. And so when you kind of see people saying, learn everything there is about ChatGPT, it's like, well, that's one tool. And ChatGPT and GPT-4, as you know, is one language model. So every circle that you see on this diagram is a large language model. These are these large kind of engines, if you will, that are powering these tools. And so it's really important for all of us in education to recognize that these engines are coming from a place, are created by organizations, groups, businesses, companies. They are owned by private or open businesses, each with their own set of ideas, ideals, principles, and ethical codes. Okay. And so it's really important for us to recognize that there isn't just one. And these large language models are being touted as being some of the most powerful technologies now that are being innovated on. And this is the key. When you pull back all the layers from Microsoft Bing and ChatGPT, it's actually the large language model innovations that are really powering a lot of these changes in the way that we interact with AI tools. And so every one of these, you might, if you look, you can see Llama, which is, I can't remember exactly where, Steve, do you remember where the Llama model is from? I know there's Palm, which is a Google's own model. GPT-4 on the right, obviously you can see it's out of date, but it's also undisclosed in terms of its size. Bloom is an open one, an open source kind of model.
I think
and everybody
as well, isn't it?
Landa's Google.
Google
as well.
I think. Yeah.
And Lambda was the one that was obviously caused all that controversy last year in terms of its purported sentience.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see the kind of technological grab that big tech is starting to do. Like, who are we investing in these? And so I just wanted to point out the key learning here for all of us is that it's far wider reaching in terms of these large tech companies having their own models, and also, whole countries. And the UK recently announced their intention to develop Brit GPT, and the UAE recently announced Falcon, which is a model that's been developed in country. And so I think it's just fascinating to see beyond just these individual tools to look much, much deeper, that there are many of these large language models. So that's my key lesson for tonight. The building block is that large language models, there are lots of them, and we need to kind of be aware, what's the driving engine behind it. Any quick comments, Sophie and Steve?
Just seeing them side by side just makes my jaw drop, because you think about the overwhelm that ChatGPT brings, and so to know that there are many, there's a sort of equal parts hope and equal parts so this whole whack-a-mole of banning ChatGPT and the like, we can see that the avalanche is coming. And so one of the key things that I've loved, Tom, is that you have said AI for education, and they've been quite deliberate about that choice of word as opposed to AI in education, because it speaks to that people just sort of Trojan horsing in. So I love the fact that we can see this and be overwhelmed by it, but then it also, okay, how do we stay informed and educated for a world that, as you said, in a world where this is coming?
Yeah, I think for me, it's actually just really helpful the majority of educators sit outside these technologies, right? And yet somehow having to engage with them. So I think that where we can get this kind of creates a bit of a conceptual map around just one component of these technologies. But it's also a really powerful reminder, as you said, Tom, for us to understand these technologies are intentionally created and currently intentionally created primarily by organisations which have their own ethics and so on, also their own agendas. But it also then invites us as educators to consider, well, how are we educating tomorrow's technology designers for designing tomorrow's technologies? We are active participants in this rather than passive recipients. And in fact, we contribute to the architecture of these emerging technologies by the mere fact that we participate in education. Yes.
I mean, that sort of the shift in definition and of how large language models are becoming something new in the space of computer science, in terms of it's starting to be much more front facing and consumer facing. People are talking about it's a threat to software and all this sort of interesting stuff. And so there's this huge disruption. But I think, so this is at the architectural layer. Steve and I often refer to that application architectural layer. And there's other layers and stuff. But I think, as educators, how much do I need to know about this? And I suppose, like you say, just like recognizing there's a proprietary nature of some of these, and that there's a location as well, and that location means something, you know, to a lot of them. Okay, so large language models, something for us to kind of keep track of. Sophie, I'm going to ask you now to, tell us a little bit about what do you, I'm going to skip to the next slide. Are you going to jump straight into telling us what's the thing that you want to teach us?
So I'm going to actually get you to do a little bit of an activity first, and then we're going to do a bit of teaching. All right. So pen and paper. Let's go old school. Or you can type in the chat. I just want you to identify for me, out of these images, which images are images of biological human beings. So just put the letters that you think. Put them in the chat. Just make a note of them yourself. You don't have to share.
And we've got a delay, Sophie, so we might not be able to do super live. Let's see if I can. Steve, what do you reckon about A?
Yeah.
I found it. So Juliana's coming in with C. I found this really hard, and E for me was like, okay, that feels. I don't know. There's a vibrancy to it.
None. Sean says none.
Yeah, Sean's gone none. Juliana's gone H as well. B, E, I, and D.
I.
Priya's gone C, E, and I.
I wonder what it is that they're looking at.
Yeah. So this is what I want to know, right? So Michael's gone I and E. Okay. All right. Let's reveal the answer, Tom.
Yeah, let's reveal the answer.
Okay. So now let's go back and have a look. So C got identified. C is not human. H is human. Nice. Well done, Juliana. B, E, I, D. So E, D. This is really interesting. A lot of people get stuck around particularly D and E because of the gloss that sits over that E image. But we can see here that we have a range of images that often have us stumped, right? And I appreciate the lag, but I'm just going to talk through these images for a second. And if you just want to put in the chat your thoughts around what kind of made you choose some of the images and what hesitate around some of the images. But if we have a look at A and F, those are images taken from one of the early kind of human interface technologies called soul machines. And by early, I mean 2018. So it was really interesting. Tom, you spoke a little earlier around 2016. That was ages ago. And it's because things are moving so fast. I mean, the reality is 2016 is a blip in the ocean, isn't it? But in the nature of these technologies, things are moving so fast. And so A and F are 2018 forms of human interface technology. And then C and I, they are 2021 through a tool called Face Generator that any educators and their students can use. And B, did anyone pick B as being human? Yeah.
Yeah, Alina had B.
Yeah. And so B is the most recent, I guess, of these technologies, which is Midjourney, which has this extraordinary capacity to create these lifelike images. So on the basis of kind of just thinking about that, your students can access this technology, you can access this technology. Professional organisations engage a lot with this technology now because it's actually quite helpful for modelling agencies or marketing agencies to be able to utilise what we call, I think the next image, Tom, go to the next, the answer.
Yeah.
And just to talk about that, the nature of the technology, the face generator technology that's used. Yeah. So this is just one example. 100,000 humans that don't exist. I mean, even just that conceptually is kind of something for us to grapple with as educators, but also just to think about it, really pragmatically, that being able to utilize these technologies where you're not using humans frees up organizations in lots of ways. So, there are some benefits and it can be problematic as well. Just go to the next slide. So first of all, we have, the interesting academic exercise around, being able to create human faces. What happens when we start to use these technologies in more problematic kind of territory? Just have a look at these images and give me a sense again in the chat. I would never have said, gee, yeah, fantastic. Looking at these images, do they have a sense of being real? Obviously, I've sort of crossed out, I haven't. One of them's been crossed out by a Harvard law professor. I was putting this presentation together just on Friday evening, and I was just, looking through the Twitter feed around the emerging kind of dialogue of these what we call them, fake news kind of stories that have been generated by this technology. And of course, there's so much conversation in this last week around the potential indictment of Donald Trump in relation to, fraud for payments. And so there's a lot of conversation in the US around whether or not he's going to be arrested. And all of these images started coming through. Just flick to the next one. And these images were being generated by Midjourney. And within a couple of days, they just started flooding the internet. And if we think about Midjourney, very recent kind of technology, and started off, if you go and have a look and explore around the page, you see these amazing kind of, visuals of what we would kind of classically think about as science fiction kind of, technology, architecture and creation. But within a very short period of time, within a 6-month period of time, we're using these technologies to kind of heighten political conflict, heighten political discord. And in America right now, when you play around with these technologies, you kind of, it's not an exaggeration to say you're playing around with life and death. People have died in relation to conflict around Trump and his presidency. So as educators, there are questions for us around how do we understand the nature of these kinds of technologies, these technologies that can create human images, very lifelike kind of images. Just go to the next slide. And just to sort of say, I've just kind of put up some cheeky images here. Depending on your politics, you can kind of see these as relatively humorous. Go to the next slide. But here are 2 examples, right? And again, if you've got a chance to pop something in the chat, talk to me about whether or not you see these images as being real or fake images. And I'll just, give away the story. So the one where Trump is kind of thrown to the ground, I think it actually kind of quite obviously looks like it's not real. It kind of has a cartoonish kind of look to the face. But the one where Trump is praying, that is also a fake image. But Trump has now owned this image and legitimized it by resharing it himself and given credibility to an image that is fake. And I guess I would sort of say that, one of the reasons it has to kind of matter to us as educators is that increasingly with these technologies and this post-truth era, we are increasingly vulnerable to being persuaded. Now, propaganda itself is not new, it's centuries old. But the more real propaganda becomes, the more problematic it becomes. And so I would sort of talk to us as educators. We're not all sitting in an ICT classroom, but we're all sitting here as educators, educating today's students to be tomorrow's body politic. And so it's important for us to have kind of an understanding around the complex nature of these technologies, so that we can kind of equip our students to be informed engagers with tomorrow's body politic in what's becoming an increasingly complex territory through these, fake AI constructions of human identity.
The one thing I would mention here is how available these technologies are. That's one of the challenges, isn't it, Sophie?
Correct. Anyone and students could use them, and I think my recommendation around all of these kinds of technologies is to engage, not to run away, to be informed and equipped and able to engage around them and equip your students the same. But they can. And not only can they necessarily even create with these technologies, but they will be recipients of the products of these technologies on their TikTok feed or, Snapchat or whatever. And so they need to be informed in that sense as well around just recognizing these technologies. And I think it's important for us to kind of have a mindset of, many of us kind of sit outside this digital kind of space and are educated in an environment of recognizing kind of a human nuance. Increasingly, our students will live in this interdigital space where these nuances will become more conflated. And so our capacity to kind of educate around these will become, more critical. But we can. And because we have access to these technologies, we can play around with them with our students, and by doing so can educate our students at the same time.
There's a real, even just scanning through the Midjourney feeds, there's a really good cultural analysis of what they've got everything from make Hulk like a little baby out through
Yes.
to logos. It's really quite interesting just as a cultural analysis to explore what it is that people want to create with these tools. But I have to echo that is it has a fire to it that can escape us. Oh, let me just create this, this little meme and then post it somewhere. And once it's out there, it's really, really hard to control. And I think we do need to engage. And then that next layer is the dialogue as well. And I've been using Discord with my kids and talking about what it can generate. And then also posting to them, here are some images that it's created. Everything from like Joe Biden singing Baby Shark through to Bruce Willis selling his likeness to a deepfake company because he's got early onset dementia. And what are the ramifications around that? And so these tools are so jaw-droppingly good that they can overwhelm the conversation. And that's where I see sort of the key role for educators is the crucible of dialogue.
And contextualizing,
Correct.
Being able to contextualize these tools as well becomes then, and I think, as Tom sort of has situated this conversation, it's AI for education as well, that these tools can actually be really, really empowering and enable us to be hugely creative. As long as it's always contextualized, then we've got a chance of taking the benefits from it and not being quite so caught up in the highly problematic nature of these technologies as well.
So just for me, the thing that I'm learning though, what you've shared, Sophie, is just that interesting reaction to an image of Trump owning an image that in a way, in a socially accepted kind of way, by retweeting and kind of verifying via the kind of norms of a platform that this is okay with me. How that's really interesting, because there's one thing creating this image and the subversion of the truthiness of it, but then it's another thing to accept it as a truth by the subject of that image.
Correct.
That's another layer, isn't it?
And I think this, so, for those of you who are tragic like me and closely follow American politics, so, 10 days ago, Trump kind of truthed out on his Truth Social that he was going to be arrested and indicted last Tuesday. And so the dialogue around that has been that he was maybe stirring up his supporters to come out and protest in the streets. Now, it turned out that very, very few came out and protested in the streets. But what if he then goes and retruths an image about him being arrested, one of those other images I've shown you, and it does bring people out in the streets, and there are riots, and we do have another January 6th, that is it is highly problematic. So we need to be educated. We actually need to be educated for this post-truth digitized world. And as I said, propaganda is not new, but the nature of propaganda that we engage with is new. And so we need to be educated around that nature.
So let me keep this show moving. One of the things that it's worth saying is that, so Midjourney's as one tool of many tools that are doing this type of work, it is still relatively new, but they're working incredibly fast. And so the ultra realism photography that those examples that you're seeing, that's easy. People are just writing a description of what they want, and returning with these images pretty much straight away. And straight away, they are like ultra real. I've been playing around this week and shared some with Steve and Sophie that of my own. And it's just both a slightly weird situation to create images of other, synth humans, and sort of look into their kind of face and to kind of experience that. That's a strange experience. Jamie Wahab is asking, is this all possible through video too? Steve, you've been tracking some video tools, haven't you?
Yeah, so Runway ML has their Gen 2. So it's not quite, it's available to beta and to specific developers, but they're bringing this level of tools to video, and you can already do Runway ML and play with. They've just got this kind of like suite of AI tools, whether it's remove a background or place me in a lush green landscape. So it's got that capacity already. But one of the key elements that it's developing in Gen 2 is this ability to kind of track a video, have a normal video. So say us having a conversation and then layer over that a different skin. So it can be me as a cartoon character, Tom as in a world where Tom lives.
In a world.
And so, in a world. And so that level is coming, the complexity that comes with that, and which is interesting from Runway, is that it's run in the browser. And so typically to do your CGI and components like that, rendering is a big thing. But it just feels like it's getting quicker and more real. Yeah, and simpler. That's the key part as well.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that this last week, there's been a huge number of announcements about creative tools. And I kind of updated on Prompt Craft, my new newsletter. Quick plug if you haven't subscribed already.
Nice, subtle.
It was just Adobe Firefly, Canva, just a massive suite of AI powered tools. So creative expression in all of its forms is going to be powered up and shifted and fragmented in all sorts of interesting ways by these technologies. Steve, I'm going to come to you. Actually, just before we finish, Sophie, you had this last question. Tell us a little bit about the question that you have of here. Tell us a little bit why this is important.
Well, actually, I think that you just mentioned a moment ago, Tom, around the images that you had shared with us and this notion of synth human and looking into the soul, or is there soul? So the work that I've been doing with Steve over the last few years is actually around how do we as educators develop a cognizance of our humanness inside the education space. And then through a human-centered kind of lens, equip our students to understand themselves as humans in relationship with emerging technologies. So I'd say that, we've always had technology. Since we had fire, we've had technology. But we've used technology quite consciously and externally to us. But emerging intelligent technologies, we use them in a very different way, in a far more complex way. And we are more in relationship with those. So we kind of talking about sitting inside the semantic web or the spatial web, or, but we're in a much more complex relationship. So as educators, we need to start thinking about, well, how do we equip our learners to be able to live well inside a cyber-physical, the emerging cyber-physical world that will be their world of tomorrow. And I think we've got to stop saying tomorrow, because as this conversation is showing, we're in this world today. So that's kind of the space we're sitting in. How do we develop human-centeredness so it enables us? So first of all, it develops our cognizance, then it informs us. But in what ways are we as educators equipped to equip our learners to live well in this cyber-physical world?
Do you think the cyber-physical also will blend? So as much as temporarily we've got to stop saying it's going to happen soon, it's round the corner, it's on the horizon, right. It's not far now. Do you think that also there's a shift in terms of cyber-physical, in terms of the blending of that?
I think that the usefulness around the concept of cyber and physical, it gives us a kind of a language architecture to kind of make sense of this more complex space that we're going into, but it will become redundant. As we and to be honest, it might become redundant in a week with the way things are going.
Yes.
So yeah, I guess to answer your question, it would be yes. But currently, I think that it's probably, to me, really helpful language in allowing us to kind of language this space that we are, this transitional space we're in. And also actually to serve as a sliding door moment, because it allows us to ask the question, do we actually want to disappear this currently intentional relationship between the cyber and the physical human experience? Because we have an opportunity to make decisions around that. It was interesting, Sam Altman at the end of last week was kind of talking about this behemoth and raising concerns and inviting us to be cautious and intentional in our use of these technologies, rather than getting all caught up in the bells of whistles and kind of running with them in ways that the horse may bolt and become even more problematic. So it's a question as much as it is a function.
Just going to take a couple of comments. So first of all, Jamie saying, are you three even real? So
I would have made myself way better looking.
Hard to verify that, Jamie. So I'm not really sure how do you, I mean, this is, strangely enough, this is an interesting thing, is where I think, and I've said this to both you, Sophie and Steve, is that I think that question, we may laugh, but actually that question of, is this synthetic, I think is going to become more normal for us, especially when we're maybe receiving student work or the things that they create or the things that they write. Is our first question potentially synth, as a query? I'm going to keep us moving. So first, James, thank you for your comment here. Mentioned simplicity of access and the level of access, the free nature of the way in, the browser as the doorway. A lot to do with Everett Rogers' idea of diffusion of a good idea. The ChatGPT nature of a conversational chatbot being the kind of starting point for many is not, is not by accident. That's something that actually made it very, very accessible to people, and I think that's just fascinating. Also, just speed. I mean, if you think about diffusion, is actually a trajectory. And is about movement. It's very active, and these ideas are spreading really quickly and taking hold. And so that's one of the things that drives all of that. Okay, so Steve, tell us something that you are going to share. In fact, let me set you up. We've got all these images, Steve. We've got like these ultra realistic tools. I can pretty much write a sentence and get back this ultra realistic kind of photography. What sort of things can we use to maybe explore the other side of that?
Well, the first part is, and you referenced it at the start when we talked about the pre-trained part. So this is from an open source movement company called Hugging Face, and they have lots of data sets, and you can learn lots and lots about. I guess their intention is what OpenAI started with, which was to open source AI. And one of the tools that they've got that I particularly enjoy is Diffusion Bias Explorer. And so what it does is it allows you to choose one of Stable Diffusion 1.5, DALL-E, or Stable Diffusion 2. It hasn't got Midjourney in there, but it allows you to put in a word. And when I search for that word, I put in the word intellectual. So on the one on the left there, I put in the word intellectual. And now, as you can see, it is very represented by old, hairy white males. And you got glasses in there. And then I put teacher in there as well. And all of a sudden, it kind of listed those three. And then on the right-hand side, so I compared DALL-E versus DALL-E. And this is a free tool you can use through the QR code. I put pleasant, and then I put teacher. And so then you can see that it has this bias towards the type of image that it would generate. So these are all randomly generated images. And I think what's really, really powerful is when we compare side to side and understand that the prompt that we give the model, it has an inherent bias in it. And one of the images that you will show later, Tom, we talk about an AI having an opaque nature, like not being able to kind of see what's in and underneath the hood. And I have a real issue with that, because an AI doesn't have a moral compass. It's trained on it, but what is it trained on? And I think tools like this are really powerful provocations. So all you would need to do is just, and you can choose from the labels, and when I look for an accountant, what images come up? When I go to an electrician. So quite specific images, you start to see that it has a leaning in certain ways. So these tools are beautiful because it starts to, one of the things that I'm really cognizant with my kids is to increase their awareness of fallibility and to understand that we can be overawed and by the demo, like, oh, and the output is just like breathtaking. Well, when we saw ChatGPT and it had its first run through, our jaw hit the floor. And now we're starting to get a little bit more of a literacy around it and ways to work with it better and ways to push back on it. And it's the holes that are in there as well. And so Diffusion Bias Explorer is a free little tool that you can just plug in with your kids, share on the board, and talk with your students about what they see and why it's producing certain images. And then talking about things like representation. Do you see yourself? Maybe you're an Indigenous boy, and do you see yourself here? And I think if it's going to be AI for everyone, then we need to ensure that the data sets that are included are representative of everybody. And so these tools do that beautifully.
Sophie, what are your immediate thoughts?
I mean, I just think this is a perfect example of AI for education, right? Because it, by engaging with this tool, first of all, it educates on the concept of bias at its simplest. It enables you to understand the language sets that these technologies are built upon and the bias that sits inside them. And then it allows for all other kinds of conversations, as you said, around representation. So it's a great example. It's interesting. Only now, a week ago, this is how quickly things are happening, the first government in the world, the Australian government, has launched a responsible AI platform to enable businesses to start to be educated in responsible use of these technologies, understand the nature of these technologies, because we're educating students today, but the majority of people engaging with these technologies are in the workplace and having to deal with the nature of these kind of complexities as it is. So the fact that we can equip our students with this kind of bias awareness, I think, is a really incredibly powerful learning opportunity provided by an intelligent technology, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's interesting how it's sort of using the technology back on itself and just looking at a lot of reversal kind of work. You see a lot of these. And so, Steve, you could have mentioned there sort of framework that we've referenced before, and this is where we're going to take our conversation now, is to start to think about these 4 attributes. This is taken from BBC's R&D department and published a while ago. So something for us, and I think there's urgent work in education for us to, establish common language, common ground around, frameworks of thinking, frameworks of reference, which isn't there. And so you look into, an industry like journalism, which is sort of a light kind of reference there to maybe the BBC, but they've had they've got themselves together over many years around the impact of AI on that industry. And I think there's lots of work for us to do in education to be more AI ready. And I think that these types of frameworks are helpful. And I think we're just going to spend the next sort of just under 10 more minutes just exploring some of the aspects of our AI systems and models that we're currently dealing with. And these 4 different attributes highlighted by the BBC, these should be kind of flags for us about, what these are known deficiencies of the tools that we are using. And I do think this is really fascinating, and I'd be interested to hear from both of you about this, but the speed with which these technologies are being delivered, ported, shared with the public. I think it's just fascinating how fast it's happening, but also how fallible, opaque, invisible, and ubiquitous they are becoming. But they're shipping products that don't work. They're shipping products that are hard to actually understand. And I think that's just we're just experiencing, technology in a very different way, where the reliability is actually almost up front, saying, oh, you can't trust anything that this says. I saw Bard, we can't get Bard in Australia at the moment, but it's an open waitlist. So that's Google's chat bot version, which kind of released I think at the beginning of last week, and I saw a screen grab from it saying, Google doesn't take any responsibility for anything that you learn or read or anything that happens. It's nothing to do with us. And so, the hands are up, and there's significant fallibility about, how these things are wrong. Which one of these are you, Sophie, which one of these four are you sort of drawn to in terms of your thinking about the deficiencies of AI systems?
Well, it's interesting you talk about fallibility, because when I kind of just only this last week, kind of just been following this dialogue, around those images, the example I provided, the really interesting thing is that we're kind of calling ourselves out around the fallible nature of these technologies. So Priya kind of really, powerful comment to sort of say, critical for us to train the mind, train our students to discern fact from fiction. One of the critical things that, we do in education. And I think that we're actually, ironically, a little bit like, the tool that Steve just showed a moment ago. We're using the technology to call out the technology because it is ubiquitous, because we sit so much inside it. The technology is almost the vehicle that we use now to critique the vehicle. And I think that, if anything, the last few years have heightened our senses again. And I think we go through different, periods where we are either more alert or less alert to fraudulent dialogue that sits around us. And we're currently going through an acutely heightened phase around that. And it's a product of, recent years' political turmoil. And I think also the emergence of these kind of technologies. And so I think it's actually, as I said, using the technology for itself. Also to remember that we as human beings are hugely fallible, right? And so it allows us, again, another opportunity to explore fallibility from both angles, technology and humanness, because, again, in an education dialogue, we're educating our humans to thrive as much as humanly possible into the future. So I think that's a powerful prompt.
Yeah, just a fallibility piece and connecting it back to ultra realism in photography is that often it's almost too good. Like you can tell, so in a strange way that it's like not showing enough fallibility is in fact its downfall. Steve, what are you drawn to on here?
It's just like trying to choose between your kids.
Well, you've talked about opaqueness, so can you explain a bit more about what that really means?
The opaqueness for me is when you are deliberately where misinformation is fed or a lack of information. So like GPT-4 was released last week, and there was furor about the technical documentation because it was really absent of any information that was of any value. And so when you can't read the terms and conditions and really get into the weeds of it, especially as something so powerful and potent, I have a real, instantly my spidey senses going off, because you couple that.
Did your spidey senses go off when you signed up to Facebook 20 years ago, 15 years ago, whenever it was? Did your spidey senses go off then? Because I think we all naively gave ourselves up as, data, today's oil. And we were, I think it was a period where we were naive to the opaqueness, and that the consequences of that have made us now far more alert to opaqueness.
And when we signed up, Facebook's original business model wasn't the business model that it shifted to. And so the advertising model was what it learned as the plane was being built. And so that's really important. So the original, sharing between friends, or for my own brother, he was like, here's all the girls I'm making out with when I'm in college. He's like, hey, this is great.
Congratulations.
Yeah, awesome, I think. But they shifted the landscape. And interesting, like one of the things that I've been thinking of a lot about lately is we've been kind of working for Facebook in some way, because we've given them private information, labeled that private information. This is a photo of me on a beach in wherever. And how are they using that information? Because all of a sudden they have Meta AI and they have all of these tools as well. And so as soon as you pair a powerful technology with an intent that maybe is largely driven by profit and benefiting a few, then I'm just really, I worry. But then I have to kind of, like, using your protocol, Tom, is like zoom back and go, well, what if it was all open source? So you give away the manual for this stuff, and then what the bad actors can do with it then. And so the opaqueness worries me, because I'm like, oh, okay, where's the rest of the information? And I'm skeptical. And I also, to that point as well, is that the Google takes no,
responsibility.
like, I just have a real issue with that. It's like, I've built it. Here you go. Light yourself on fire. And I just feel like that. Take responsibility. Like, the company that's brave enough to say, we'll take responsibility to be ethical and do that. And I do think it's a responsibility of educators. It's like, all right, if we are going to be helping educate the future developers of this, then let's look at these, be dangerous enough to know our way around it, and also to call that stuff out. Because I do think that we're getting to the point, back to your cyber digital component, is soon there will be no generation that wasn't born without a digital world. But we still now have very much, like, I went to uni and there was no Google, and so we came in, we have this comparison, which I think is potent, to really sort of say, hey, humanness requires us to deeply connect, and let's do that and help raise a generation and leave them, as Bucky Ford would say, with a world, the world that's theirs, and a world that it's not hell in a handbasket.
Sophie,
moment, isn't it? Right, where it's kind of a really scary time and a really, really exciting time to be in education, because we have the opportunity to architect the problematic nature of that new future in positive ways. And that, again, the opaqueness is another really powerful example of inviting us to actually become critical thinkers in that opaqueness, and to ask the critical questions around it. I think this environment, it's a highly disruptive environment, but disruption creates enormous opportunity. It's around, as educators, feeling supported and feeling equipped to manage that disruption. And that's kind of the space where I'm really interested in sitting in, is what are the tools, what are the resources, what's kind of the framework to support educators on the front line of this environment.
And the ubiquity is important to note here, because that's just growing, isn't it? And so if you think about these, the opaqueness hopefully will change, and it will be easier to see what's going on. The fallibility will change, but the ubiquity is likely to continue to grow. And so that kind of feels like a different attribute, in the sense that the other three are going to probably improve. And so, but the ubiquity, for example, I was just reading that like over nearly 25% of the world's population use Gmail. And so what happens when, Gmail, AI, generative kind of tools and layers get kind of switched on for Google Workspace? Those are really important, and that's why people are sort of tracking, what Google is doing around these technologies, because of the scale that they have is very, very different, than even Microsoft 365. I recognize that we're kind of heading towards the last sort of few minutes of our session. Sophie, have you got anything else you just want to share, or any other thoughts before we wrap up?
It's interesting, Tom, because I sort of sit inside the education space and also inside that corporate world environment. I work, with a lot of in the corporate sector, and there are all these kinds of conversations that are now starting to be had around the nature of these kinds of technologies generating policy, or creating content. Who owns the content? How legitimate is the content? Should the content be fact checked? Should the content be created by AI, but owned by the organization? Where does responsibility lie? But also, how do these technologies free up our staff to engage in other things? So yes, we're having this conversation sitting inside the education space, but because of the rapid and expansive nature of this technology, this is a conversation that's happening in real time everywhere, all at once. And it's really interesting to kind of sit in both of these spaces. And I guess just to sort of say to educators, you're not the only ones really grappling with this, seeing the challenges, but also exploring the opportunities. It's very much sitting inside the corporate sector as well.
Steve, do you want any final comments?
Yeah, I'm going to say that this book, Atlas of AI, just blew my mind, because Kate Crawford is an expert in the space, and I've found that, and I say this to my kids, like I'm no expert here. I've waded in this space for a while, thanks to working with Sophie for so long, but leaning on people who are really calling out companies for bad ethics, Timnit Gemaru and Tristan Harris and those people. I've been searching for those, and I've got made by Humans as well. I've got that on my book list as well. It's another recommendation from Sophie. And I'm really looking for people to paint a picture and help me, because I feel like what we're doing with these sessions, Tom, is we're outlining, and some of us are colouring in the lines a little bit with the more we play, and I'm really relishing the sharing that's happening amongst educators. I really feel like it's a collective coming together, but it's finding those great resources, because for me, like, the extractive nature of technology has always been known to me, but even just to think about the minerals that go into the computers that generate that, it's like, oh my God. So you bring that into a conversation around climate change, and then you say that to your students, then all of a sudden we're very well informed. So mine is a non-digital recommendation, is to find and share those resources. And Kate Crawford works for Microsoft, so somebody that does ask deep, big questions and is not afraid to actually paint a complete picture for everybody.
Yeah, interesting to think about that diagram of all those language models. We may well be in a place in the future where we get to choose and we have more control, like you can in ChatGPT Plus, where you can pick which language model is going to run your prompt, and we all are choosing from our own kind of ethical framework, and we get to kind of have, there's more information about them. It says the nutritional value on the front. There's clear labeling. There's standardized labeling for our language models. I can imagine that's in our kind of near future, including kind of sustainability and carbon footprint of these things. I'm just going to finish by sharing a brand new resource. I can see there's still a bunch of people hanging on to the bitter end with us. Thank you so much. We are over time. Also, thank you to I can see lots of people with kind of comments in the chat, which is lovely to see. Brand new resource that I've been building and creating. I want to share with you, which I'm going to send because you're on the list. So this is a set of scenario cards for some ethical discussions around some different topics that are popping up within the space of AI for education. Steve and I developed some of these certainly together recently, and I've kind of built them out. And so this is a Miro board, and so you basically, what you're going to get when you get access is a link. This will open up. You get a little scenario to explore. You get some questions, so a kind of fictional scenario to explore here, like AI artwork. A student hands in AI art, but their prompts are really expressive and creative. So what do we do? Trying to kind of think about value. Different topics like voice cloning, fallibility is in here as well. And so even email voice, what happens when we use AI assistants to write our emails to parents for too long? Does that kind of change the way that they see us, the perceptions of us? And so what you'll be getting, folks in the audience, is I'll send this Miro board link in the follow-up notes, plus the slides, bits and pieces that we've put together for tonight's session. And I'm hoping that, these scenario cards will just provoke more dialogue. You'll be able to maybe take one and maybe use it as just pick one and use it as like a 20-minute task in a staff meeting, or email it to some colleagues and to kind of provoke some talk around some of these important topics. And I'm sure there'll be millions of different ways that we could use it and build from it, including some student versions, which we'll be able to also create as a result of this as a start. So I hope you find this helpful. I hope you found tonight really helpful. And can I just say on behalf of everybody in the audience to Sophie Fenton, you're a star. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been fantastic. Thank you for the invitation. I've loved being in the conversation.
It's great. And Steve Brophy, your second webinar.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's been lots of fun as usual.
It's been great. And so this is the last session that we're going to be running for this Australian term. I have to say Australian because obviously there's other school systems happening, and we've got our international audience to look after as well. But after the Easter break, so probably back end of April, we'll probably be looking at picking up some new sessions and reconvening.
We've got to talk ethics. We've got to talk ethics.
We've got to talk ethics. We've got to continue to kind of hold the space for the dialogue. And so thank you to everybody in the chat. And yeah, we'll look out for the email notifications of the future sessions. And I hope you can kind of join us again another time to explore some conversations and dialogue about AI for education. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.